Welcome back to our latest explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating historical analysis. We're looking at the actual real-world logistics behind the Torah corruption theory. So, there's a claim notably put forward by a theorist named Ahmed, which basically suggests that the original text of the Torah was fundamentally massively altered. But hey, rather than getting bogged down in endless theological debates, we're going to look at the source's logistical breakdown of this claim. The analysis we're unpacking treats this proposed historical cover-up like a massive global heist, and it systematically breaks down exactly what pulling off a conspiracy of this scale would actually entail in the real world. Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're starting with the core conspiracy claim itself. Then we'll examine the 5 independent ancient communities involved. After that, we'll search for the missing time window, detail the mechanical cover-up logistics, and finally summarize the absolute hurdles of pulling this off. To really set the stage for this, I want you to just keep one central question in the back of your mind as we go through the evidence. Could the greatest cover-up in human history have literally left zero trace? I mean, is it genuinely possible for a highly elaborate, perfectly synchronized historical cover-up to succeed across multiple continents over hundreds of years without leaving behind a single piece of physical or historical evidence? Well, let's find out what the source material says. Section 1. The core conspiracy claim. To kick off this logistical breakdown, we really have to establish exactly what the proposed textual change even is. After all, you can't investigate a heist if you don't even know what was stolen, right? Okay, so according to the theory, the original, untouched Torah stated that Ishmael was the son of the covenant. It detailed an entire journey to Mecca, and it clearly prophesied Muhammad. But the text that we actually have today names Isaac as the covenant son, and it contains absolutely zero mention of Mecca or those specific prophecies. So, for Ahmed's theory to hold any water, a highly systematic, deliberate, and widespread change had to be made from that first version to the second. That is the exact massive scope of the alleged rewrite we're talking about here. Section 2. 5 independent ancient communities. The source uses these groups as independent witnesses, and this is where the logistical breakdown becomes incredibly complex. Let's look at the scattered communities that would have needed to flawlessly coordinate this entire thing. First up, we have the community at Qumran, who you probably know from the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, this wasn't just your everyday group. They were an isolated, highly sectarian Jewish sect living way out in the harsh Judean desert. And here's the kicker. They deliberately separated themselves from mainstream Judaism precisely because they believed the mainstream Jerusalem establishment was completely corrupt. They preserved their own precious manuscripts from roughly 250 BC to 70 AD. And yet, their version of the Torah clearly says Isaac. Second on the list is the Alexandrian Jewish community. These were Greek-speaking Jews living way down in Egypt. They were entirely separated, both geographically and culturally, from the Judean Jews. Around 250 BC, they went ahead and translated the Torah into Greek, creating the famous text known as the Septuagint. But despite their complete isolation from Jerusalem, their translated Torah also explicitly says Isaac. Third, and wow, this is where the intense historical hostility really comes into play, we have the Samaritans. This group completely bitterly split from mainstream Judaism around 400 BC. They actively despised the Jews, going so far as to build their own rival temple on Mount Gerizim. Ancient sources, like the Gospel of John, make it crystal clear that Jews and Samaritans wanted absolutely nothing to do with one another. Yet, the Samaritans preserved their own completely independent Torah for 2,400 years, and guess what? Their Torah says Isaac. For our 4th and 5th groups, we look at the Babylonian exiles and the mainstream Jerusalem Jewish community. You have Jews who were exiled to Babylon way back in 586 BC, and they developed entirely distinct scribal traditions all the way over in Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, mainstream Judaism centered in Jerusalem was producing the Masoretic text tradition. And just to round out the timeline, later Masoretic scribes around 900 to 1000 AD meticulously added vowel points to ensure exact pronunciation. But across all of these incredibly diverse groups and eras, their Torah says Isaac. So the crucial takeaway the source emphasizes here is that despite bitter theological rivalries, deep mutual hatred in some cases, and vast geographical separation spanning 3 entire continents, every single one of these ancient independent texts universally reads Isaac. For this conspiracy to actually work, the analysis notes that all these rival groups who hated each other would have had to quietly, secretly agree to make the exact same widespread edits to their most sacred texts. Moving to Section 3, the missing time window. We've got the suspects, sure, but when exactly did these completely disconnected groups have the opportunity to commit the crime? When we map out history from before 400 BC all the way to post-632 AD, the analysis is basically searching for a gap, a dark window where this massive global rewrite could have occurred without anyone raising the alarm. But as the timeline suggests, no such window actually exists. The source notes a major theological problem with the timing. If the corruption happened before the Samaritan split in 400 BC, it would mean the text was altered while major prophets like Malachi were still active and walking around. But this completely contradicts later Islamic claims, such as those found in the Quran, which explicitly assert that active prophets judged by a pure, uncorrupted Torah. So that early window before 400 BC, it's firmly closed. Okay, what if it happened later, say between 250 BC and 70 AD? Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls match the later text perfectly, meaning that highly isolated anti-establishment Qumran sect would have had to be in on the conspiracy. And if it happened after 70 AD, we run into a literal physical impossibility. The Dead Sea Scrolls had already been sealed up in clay jars, buried deep in desert caves, and completely lost to history until 1947. No one could have possibly altered them. Yet when they were finally discovered, they perfectly matched the later Masoretic texts we have today. The timeline provides absolutely zero opportunity for a synchronized cover-up. Section 4. The mechanical cover-up. Logistics. We've looked at the who and the when, so now the source moves to the staggering physical mechanics of this theoretical cover-up. To actually pull this heist off, the analysis outlines 4 highly improbable steps these ancient conspirators would have to perfectly execute. First, they'd somehow have to identify and physically locate every single scroll in existence, from Alexandria to Rome to Antioch, down to tiny scattered villages. Second, scribes would have to manually change dozens of passages identically. We're talking Genesis 17, 21, 22, 25, 26, and so on, making absolutely sure to remove every reference to Mecca and Muhammad with 0 typos. Third, they'd have to destroy every single original copy. And fourth, they'd have to do all of this in an analog world without leaving a single trace of communication behind. And we really can't gloss over the human element here. This monumental task would require literal mortal enemies to cooperate. Mainstream Jews would have needed to send messengers to the Samaritans, again, people they openly despised, and essentially say, hey there, we're doing a massive editing project to completely change our sacred history. Could you please meticulously alter all of your sacred scrolls to perfectly match ours? The analysis points out that this just totally defies all understood human historical behavior. Furthermore, the physical destruction required is just staggering to think about. In history, things survive. A tiny fragment in an ancient garbage dump, a casual quotation in a merchant's letter, a hidden scroll in a jar. But this theory requires that not one single manuscript, not one fragment, or ancient quotation mentioning Ishmael as the sacrifice survived anywhere on planet Earth. We're talking complete and total elimination across thousands of miles, 100% success rate. Finally, the source highlights a very tricky theological hurdle. This grand conspiracy would somehow have to perfectly fool the Quran itself. The Quran, revealed over 600 years later, actually affirms the Torah of its time as guidance and light and the judgment of Allah, without giving any historical indication that a massive global textual corruption had occurred beforehand. Section 5. Summarizing the absurdity. Let's step back for a second and review the source's final verdict on the towering list of logistical hurdles required for this theory to hold up against any real historical scrutiny. The summary paints a highly demanding picture. The theory requires flawless cross-continent coordination between actual blood enemies, the perfect execution of altering thousands of handwritten texts with 0 variations, the 100% complete destruction of all prior manuscripts, and absolute historical silence. All of this without a single shred of physical evidence ever being left behind. 0. That is the exact number of ancient Jewish, Christian, pagan, or early Muslim writers who ever mentioned, hinted at, or leaked this supposed massive conspiracy. Think about it. In a world where people constantly wrote letters, debated theology fiercely, and called out their rivals at every opportunity, there were 0 defectors and 0 whistleblowers. So, as we wrap up this explainer, the analysis leaves us with one core provocative question. When faced with logistical hurdles of this absolute magnitude, we have to ask ourselves, if a theory requires us to discard all known historical and manuscript evidence just to survive, is it history Or, as the source argues, is it just wishful thinking used to reconcile a theological problem? Thank you so much for exploring the fascinating mechanics of this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.